Hi, my name is Steve Lewis with Legacy Horn Experience, and I'll be chatting today with one of my old teachers and mentors, David Jolley, and just want to say welcome and thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for this opportunity. This is really fantastic. And I think you're up to such great things. Thanks for having me participate.
Thank you, thank you. One of the first things that we collaborated on, the Wendell Hoss 9 studies, which Legacy is publishing now, and you were so gracious to write the preface for the publication. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about Mr. Hoss as a student of his and shed some light on that time.
Well, thanks. And really, thanks for an opportunity to think back to that time and try and sort of summon up that atmosphere and what it was like. It really was a very special time. I was fortunate to study with him when I was 15, 16, 17 years old, just spoiled rotten. And growing up in Los Angeles, I was not, I mean, I went to the movies like everybody else, but I wasn't particularly aware of, studio musicians or what that meant. And I actually I was spoiled by three teachers. There was almost sort of a familial quality to it, like Don Dustin, who was either a graduate student at USC or just recently graduated. He was my first teacher when I was in fifth grade, and then a family friend suggested that I might be able to work with James Decker, which is already unbelievable. I mean, I'm already, sixth grade. I'm studying with this complete master, right? So he was like a father figure to me, and I studied with him for 2 years. Then he was so busy, so he sort of said, "Well, why don't you study with Mr. Hoss?" And Mr. Hoss was like the grandfather. I mean, he was just so uh, kindly and understanding, and just like the ultimate master teacher. So there I was, just spoiled rotten, really no idea what I had, but I more or less blissfully went along, because I think, like, for you and for many people, I mean, once the horn came into my life, it was like Technicolor, right? It was like the lights came on and everything started to happen, and that's really how it was for me. I mean, before the horn, it was like there was life, but then the horn happened. And I think, studying with Mr. Decker, he was a very, very good motivator, and he gave me this great grounding. The Philip Farkas book was brand new at that point, and he said, work out of this for your warm up. And then Koprush, he gave me a great grounding in Koprush, so much so that when I went to Juilliard years later, I mean, there was like nothing to say, nothing to do in Koprush. I mean, it was all done. And but also he was a motivator in that he would bring in demo albums from recording work that he was doing. And one week he brought in a demo of the LA Horn Club playing color contrast. This is the period of time when it was like 1960, 61. And he just put it on the hi-fi system. He'd say, "Oh, we did this, listen to this," just
Wow.
amazing. Or another time he brought in Billy May's Big Fat Brass, and which was with DeRosa and himself and a couple of others, I guess Brigleb, and I can't remember who the fourth horn would have been. Maybe Parisi, Dick Parisi, but anyway, God's own horn section, and the trumpets. Oh my heavens! But Billy May's Big Fat Brass. And he said, "Oh yeah, we did this last week." you know. So I'm listening to this stuff. So he was pretty incredible about motivating. He was playing in the Columbia Symphony Orchestra with Bruno Walter. They were recording the Brahms symphonies at that time. He said, "You should drop by a session." Now, I didn't know who Bruno Walter was, right? But my mother, who was a musician, she knew who Bruno Walter was. So we went over to this session. It was like, LA, even in those days, it took us an hour to get there. It was way across on the other side of town. And we didn't stay long. It was in some Masonic lodge or something. Those are always perfect places to record. And
Sure.
so we got in there, and I was so young. I just remember darkness and cables, and they were on break or something. But um uh we just stayed a short while. But these are the stories I'm telling now. This was the atmosphere we were just in. So it was just quite amazing. Studying with Mr. Haas, um, he, like those 9 studies that you found,
Right.
those are, those strike me as very typical. He would work, he would develop an etude for hand stopping, or for slightly offbeat rhythmic patterns or meters. He would develop specific exercises. Now, I had never seen those studies. He was so modest. He just did these things, right? And then what? They would be published. But we never worked on those. Now, he did do the duet book, the Los
Right.
Angeles Horn Club duet book, and a
Right.
lot of those are his and that book is meant to be a training book. It starts very basically, and there are tuning exercises and everything, and then it just progresses in this most wonderful way. I still use that duet book.
I remember.
Yeah. I used it. Yeah, we used it. That's right. And it's meant to be a teaching book, and I think it's just wonderfully successful. And as for his own lessons, he did Maxime Alphonse. I remember doing book 4, book 5, Maxime Alphonse with him. I remember working through roughly half of the Reynolds book with him. The Reynolds book was also brand new when I was working with him. So it's just like, what's the latest?
Sure.
It was just like right up on everything. But and then there was the Bach. I don't ever really remember playing warm-ups when I would go to a lesson with him. I maybe probably warmed up at home, but we would start right in with some Bach. And I and he lived, and this is part of the sort of the dreamlike quality of it all, that he lived in a house up in the hills above Glendale, that had been designed by Lloyd Wright, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's son.
Okay.
And Lloyd Wright, it has a lot of the features that you think of as Frank Lloyd Wright kind of elements, very Western, and sort of relating to the land where it was. So this house was like, I think of it like a grotto, sort of built into the side of a mountain, and it had these terracotta tiles. It has a vaguely Aztec look to it. I think you can find this house on Street Easy, or I can't remember the national version of Street Easy, but you can find it on the web to this day. And today it's landmarked. It's a landmarked house.
Wow.
But the room where I had my lessons was like this sort of vaulting kind of chamber, 2 stories high at least. So the sound in there was incredible, and it was sort of dimly lit. He had these old-fashioned sort of torchiere kinds of lamps, very 1930s, and so in this wonderful gloom, we would be talking Bach, and he had this very, I would call his teaching the power of suggestion, right? he would never say, well, this goes like this, and this goes like this, and this is how you do this. He would say, you might want to try this. And then he would play a little bit, and he would maybe play a little bit of Bach, and he'd show how a grace note would maybe displace the downbeat a little bit. So bim body dotty dee dotty dim body, and convey that sense of timing, which was all, would I have any notion of this at all? No, but it was like he just made it feel so natural, so right, that it made you want to understand what was behind it. And his sound had a liquid flowing quality, just floating on the air. Um, and one memory that I still sort of shake my head at is walking up the stairs to his house. I would hear him warming up on a movement of Bach. And, it would be floating on the air. It would just be, maybe it'd be late spring in LA, so it'd be sort of warm, and maybe there'd be insects, and you'd smell a little sage, a little eucalyptus maybe, and the sound of that Bach would just come floating down the steps to me. And I was a kid. I didn't know anything, but I loved that sound. I loved that. That was wonderful.
Wow. 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 I, I feel very fortunate to to be able to share and share these memories with you, and then my own lessons, hearing about Mr. Haas and this great there's always this great reverence when people talk about Mr. Haas, and it kind of reminds me when I talk to people about Nadia Boulanger and the sort of mystique around this sort of teacher that strives to pull music out of students and suggest things like you're talking about, and
Yeah.
teacher very that wants to talk about Bach a lot. I mean, all the Boulanger students I've talked to, so much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
And I've had conversations with people about etude books, and my own thinking is that the best, whether it's etude books or pedagogical pieces, they're always asking things of the student. There's a certain germ built in these things that require the student or the player to give more and more, and guide in a certain way. And I think just the little bit of time I've spent with Mr. Haas's etudes, they certainly have that quality about them.
Yes. Yes, I think they really do. When I saw them, I felt like I could identify them as his just immediately. They're sort of spare. They don't go on and on and on,
Right.
but they encapsulize, what he was after. And I still have like the little lesson sheets. Like he would write out lesson sheets on carbon paper. So he'd have a copy and you'd have a copy. And I still have those in a, tucked away in a manila envelope somewhere. And very often it would be, um, you know, Reynolds number 5 for next week, Maxime Alphonse book 4, number 11 or something. And then down at the bottom, he would have, um, tonguing. He would say, cultivate 5 different note lengths. And it took me, I don't know, about 20 years to understand what he meant by that. But, that was his way of saying, note lengths, that's something you want to, you should think about that. And, there's not just long and short,
Sure.
but, just volumes, in a short sentence at the bottom of one of those pages. Really
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, these carbon copies you're talking about immediately bring back memories of the notebook.
The notebook, that's right.
All your students have their book, right?
The notebook,
And,
that's right.
yeah, and yeah, I take that out from time to time, okay, what would Mr. Jolley say about da 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 da? It's great to be able to have those notes from previous lessons to always refer back to. It's really I know it's been very helpful for me, and I've talked to other students of yours that really use those. So, and then to hear you say the same about Mr. Haas, it's wonderful.
Oh, yes. Really, absolutely. And I think that also leads to, how one is all sort of always looking for another explanation of, how do you articulate well, or what's the feeling of good air, or, a nice legato. You're just always looking for, if not a better explanation, another explanation.
Sure.
We need a number of explanations for anything we're trying to get across. If we just have one explanation and, oh, this worked very well 10 years ago,
Right.
that's not going to work so well. So
Right.
you're just always on the lookout. And what did Herbert L. Clark say, or what did I don't know, what did Remington say? You're just always on the lookout for these great sort of distillations of
Sure.
teaching.
Yeah. So the Haas studies, um, where do you feel that they fit within the sort of curriculum of horn playing, for lack of a better term?
Well, I think he himself would have, just like, in a lesson, you'd have your fundamentals, you'd have your etudes, and he would put them in with other etudes, I think, and it would be, if someone needed a little work on their 5/8 rhythms, or if somebody needed a little more hand stopping work, which I think we all do. We always are looking for a way to somehow get the hand stopping to be a little more solid. I think so it would go right along with a cling, or with a coprush, or with a maxi malfons,
Sure.
and so it would go with, and I would be sure that that's what he would be thinking. Um, and I think, um, you know, I don't think he would have been thinking that these were like the summation of anything. I think his Bach suites are, if anything, the summation, right? But that's sort of the beginning and the end, and it's like, here's pure music, and here's ultimate technical challenges, all in one bundle.
Right.
Now go practice. But I think, these, I think he would have thought of these as little etudes. I'm going to write some little etudes, and they're going to help people with these specific problems, and that would have been just what he would have set out to do, and then he just did it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. They don't strike me as the kind of book that you work necessarily from front to back. It's something it's a resource when you have XYZ problem, you pull it off the shelf and work on its own. So
That's right, and it's in the spirit of, you might try etude number 5 for your hand stopping, or you might try my etude number 7 if you're working on this and such. You might, it's got that flavor to them. Yeah,
yeah. Well, thanks for chatting with me about Mr. Haas.
absolutely. Thank you, Steve. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.